For too long, a critical message has struggled to break through. Black people must take uncompromising charge of their own lives, and most importantly, the lives of their children. This responsibility cannot be delegated. It will not be undertaken by others. The time for passive observation, for wringing hands and shaking heads, has passed. The hour is late, and the stakes could not be higher, especially for the next generation. We face a stark reality where the very fabric of our existence, the way we live, has become destructive, leading dangerously towards our collective extermination. To confront this, we must initiate a profound, unsparing examination of our current condition and the state of our culture. This is not merely a call to action, it is a desperate plea for self-preservation. Before we can address our condition, we must first understand what culture truly is. Culture is not a static relic of the past. It is the dynamic sum total of all artifacts, knowledge, and practices accumulated by any group in its relentless struggle for survival and autonomy. It is inherently a process of continuous adaptation and evolution. Imagine a living organism, constantly responding to its environment. As conditions shift, as new challenges emerge that threaten a group's ability to survive and remain self-governing, so too must its culture transform. This adaptation is not optional. It is a fundamental requirement for combating those changing conditions and ensuring the group's continued existence. A culture that fails to adapt is a culture doomed to extinction. What does survival truly entail for a group? It means fulfilling at least 3 fundamental mandates. First, each individual member must maintain their mental, moral, spiritual, and physical health. This isn't just about personal well-being, it's about ensuring they remain viable long enough to reproduce themselves. Second, and equally vital, is the responsibility to nurture and care for whatever is reproduced. This is the absolute minimum requirement. If a group fails to uphold these basic tenets, if its members cannot sustain themselves to propagate and protect their lineage, then the group, quite simply, dies. It vanishes. Survival, therefore, is an active, collective commitment to health, reproduction, and the safeguarding of future generations. Beyond mere survival, there is the crucial concept of self-autonomy. For a group to be truly self-autonomous, it must possess within its own control the essential means to assure its continued survival. This means absolute independence from external forces for its fundamental needs. Dependency on others for the very elements of existence, food, shelter, security, education, is a perilous gamble. The world does not operate on altruism. No external entity will reliably ensure another group's well-being or future. True autonomy is the power to self-determine, to chart one's own course, and to secure one's own destiny without relying on the unpredictable goodwill or strategic interests of others. It is the ultimate expression of self-reliance. What are the primary obstacles that stand in the way of a group's survival and autonomy? Let us be brutally honest. One major challenge is nature itself: earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, and other environmental catastrophes. A group must develop the means to withstand and recover from these natural forces. But equally, if not more formidable, are other human beings, men and women who may seek to seize your land, your water, your resources, your very means of survival, and ultimately yourselves. Beyond these external threats, there is the insidious danger of self-destruction. A group cannot survive if its members succumb to the ravages of drug addiction, alcoholism, or other behaviors that lead to their own demise. These internal and external pressures are the true tests of a culture's resilience.
The culture that enables a group to survive and maintain its autonomy is not innate. It must be consciously transmitted from one generation to the next. The primary vehicles for this vital transmission are our institutions: the family, the church or spiritual community, the school system, and various community organizations. These are the crucibles where values, knowledge, and practices are forged and passed on. They are meant to instill the wisdom, resilience, and collective purpose necessary for the group's continuity. If these institutions fail to effectively impart the essential elements of our culture, or if they are co-opted to transmit conflicting values, then the very foundation of our group's survival is compromised. This transmission is not passive. It requires deliberate, intentional effort. Unfortunately, for some, the overriding values of the society they inhabit are fundamentally antagonistic to their survival and autonomy. This nation, for example, systematically places white people, men, and wealthy individuals in positions of inherent privilege. These 3 dominant groups dictate the societal framework. When we speak of teaching children instrumental values like equality, liberty, and fraternity, we must understand that these ideals are always subordinated to the institutional values of race, gender, and wealth. The reality is that white people receive more equality, liberty, and fraternity than black people. Men receive more than women, and the wealthy receive more than the poor. Without understanding this profound impact of institutional values on the distribution of these ideals, our children remain unprepared and ill-equipped to navigate the true dynamics of their world. Consider the historical record. In 1947, when many were seeking their first jobs, newspaper advertisements openly declared, "No Negroes need apply." This was not in the segregated South, but in major northern cities. What did this signify? It meant that even then, affirmative action was unequivocally in place, but it was exclusively for white people. The term affirmative action may not have been used, but the practice was undeniable. Yet when the time came for black communities to advocate for policies to counteract centuries of systemic disadvantage, suddenly the concept of taking turns vanished. The narrative shifted to one of meritocracy, ignoring the established reality that it has always been their turn. The lessons of kindergarten, to take your turn, to wait in line, are utterly abandoned when it comes to the distribution of power and opportunity in this nation. In 1954, a landmark Supreme Court decision overturned Plessy v. Ferguson, effectively outlawing Jim Crow and its overt, legalized racism. Many, now identifying as black, mistakenly believed the fundamental problem had been solved, but this was a profound misunderstanding. Segregation was never the root cause, it was merely a stark symbol, a symptom of a far deeper malady. The true problem lay, and still lies, in the pervasive institutional value system built upon race, gender, and wealth. This system dictates who holds power, who has access, and whose lives are valued. To focus solely on the outward manifestations of racism while ignoring the underlying institutional structures that perpetuate inequality is to profoundly misunderstand the nature of the struggle. The core issue remains stubbornly entrenched.
The United States is not yet a democracy. It is a capitalist country. While it may attempt to embrace democratic ideals within the confines of its capitalist paradigm, it will always prioritize profit when those two forces clash. The foundational premise of capitalism is to generate profit by any means necessary, with the US dollar serving as the ultimate measure of value. Yet, astonishingly, it is considered taboo to openly teach children about this fundamental reality. Anyone attempting to educate students on the mechanisms of capitalism, on how to navigate and succeed within its framework, risks being labeled a socialist or communist and ostracized. Is it not profoundly strange that in a nation built upon capitalism, its very principles are forbidden from open instruction in our schools? Within a capitalist system, there are no gray areas, no comfortable in-betweens. You are either an active participant, a capitalist, or you are a victim of the system. This is the stark choice presented. Capitalism inherently demands relentless competition, a degree of self-interest that borders on selfishness, and often a mean-spirited drive to win. Yet, what are children taught in schools? They are instructed to be cooperative, to take turns, to avoid fighting, and never to cheat. This creates a profound and dangerous disconnect. Every adult engaged in the real world of capitalism understands that the unspoken motto is, win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat. This fundamental contradiction leaves young people utterly unprepared for the world they will actually inherit. The tragic truth is that we are failing to prepare our children for the real world they must inhabit. We are sending them through years of schooling, indoctrinating them with dumb stuff, idealistic notions and cooperative values that simply do not apply in the cutthroat environment of modern capitalism. When they step out into this unforgiving reality, attempting to apply these naive lessons, they are often met with failure, exploitation, or worse. They are left vulnerable, confused, and unprotected. This systemic failure to equip them with the tools and understanding necessary to navigate the true nature of power, wealth, and competition is a profound betrayal. It is why we see them struggling, why they act in ways that seem incomprehensible to us. We have not prepared them, and the consequences are devastating.